What are the most overrated cruise experiences out there today? I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my cruising tips for travelers. I asked viewers of my videos what were the cruise experiences they found completely overrated. I collected all those together, compared them with mine, and I've drawn up a list of what I think are the most overrated cruise experiences, starting with this one. Now this one could be a little bit of a surprise. I've actually done a video about this one, and that's cruise upgrades. That can be really overrated. The reason for that is when you're upgraded, which everyone gets very excited about, you could actually end up in a cabin which you really don't like, because the cruise line will upgrade you to a cabin of their choice. You have no say in the upgrade. So you could find yourself in a strangely shaped cabin, or one that's in a really noisy area underneath the all-night disco or the theater, or on the front of the ship, or near the bow thrusters, or whatever it is. So one of the things that I always do is I like to choose my cabin. I don't go for a guaranteed cabin. I like to choose my cabin, and I say no to auto upgrades because I really like to have a cabin in a certain place. I like to be surrounded on all sides by cabins, so it's nice and quiet, and I know I'm going to have a good night's sleep. Other people, I know, they think I'm crazy and it doesn't worry them. But cabin upgrades could actually be very overrated, because you could go from a great cabin into the unknown. So they are really overrated. And I've had lots of people contacting me saying, they went for the upgrade, they're really excited, and it actually wasn't a great choice. It's very overrated. Choose your cabin, decide where you want to be, and go with it to get the cruise experience that you want. The second overrated cruise experience was one that I found quite a surprise, and that's one that gets a lot of discussion and debate, and that's balcony cabins. A lot of people said to me, I think the balcony cabins are overrated. They cost you more money than an inside or an ocean view. You don't really use them. Even when you go to places like Alaska, you want to head up out on deck to be able to look at the landscape and the glaciers. So actually you're spending money and you're not really using the balcony. Now I love a balcony cabin personally, and I really love going out there, and when you're at sea, I love going out there in and out of port. But a lot of people said for the amount of money it's really overrated, and actually you could go in a lower grade cabin and cruise more often. So definitely there's a lot of discussion around whether it's overrated. I love going on a balcony. I would always choose a balcony. For me, it's not overrated, but I was surprised just how many people said balconies very overrated. The third overrated experience was specialty dining. Now, there was a lot of discussion around the pros and cons of specialty dining. However, the feeling was that actually cruise lines are really using specialty dining, of course, to give you more choice, but actually to make more money, because you're already paying within your fare to have food in the main dining room, buffet, room service often. And there was a lot of pressure to you then eat in different venues. And there was a concern actually that they, for the amount of money you're paying, you could be paying 30, 40, 50 or even more dollars per person to eat in a specialty dining restaurant. So it's very overrated, because in fact, you're not really getting always a huge big step change, and there's just a lot of pressure to eat there. And also the concern that as they encourage you to eat more and more in specialty dining, that actually they were making the choice and availability in the main dining room, the buffet, actually less, to encourage people to go to specialty dining. But a sense that actually it was very overrated. Now, some people, of course, love specialty dining. They build into their budgets and they don't see it as overrated. Personally, I'm not a massive fan of specialty dining. I will do a little bit of specialty dining, often just to check it out, to report back on it. But I do think it's very overrated and pushed a lot. The next area was quite an interesting one, and that was the big resort attractions. On big ships now, you've got go-karts courses, you've got laser tag, you might have a roller coaster, rock climbing, rope courses, big water parks, water slides, all sorts of big features being built on ships, largely on the outside decks. And a lot of people felt these are overrated, because in fact they appeal to only a subset of people cruising, but they take up a lot of space on a cruise ship, and it means that around the pools it can be quite cramped, or it's quite hard to find deck space, because more and more of these big attractions are taking over on the big cruise ships. And what a lot of people feel is they're overrated because they're really used to get excitement, PR, hook people in to book. But actually once you're on a cruise, you're out in port, you're kind of busy, and you're actually not using them. They're very, very overrated. And the other big concern that people have is a lot of them are outside. So if you're cruising where the weather's not good or it's raining, all of those are closed. They can't be used a lot of the time, and therefore you've got all the space that's being cluttered up with these big attractions, and you can't use them, and more people are kind of crammed inside the ship and less space. So a lot of people think they're very overrated, and they only really cater for a smaller part or subset of the cruising population on board the ships. So again, some people of course love them, but a lot of people said to me they're very overrated and they're taking a lot of space that could be used for just more regular cruising activities like sitting around the pool or having more deck space. For a lot of people, hot tubs are also overrated and often there's not enough of them. Really mixed views on hot tubs. A lot of people when they're cruising like hot tubs, whether it's cold, whether it's warm, and they really like them. A lot of people have concerns about hot tubs. They don't think they're warm enough and they therefore are perhaps not as hygienic as they could be. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not a big hot tub user. And also one of the concerns is lots of kids pile into the hot tubs. It's not really regulated and kids are allowed to kind of use those as a playground. So it ends up becoming a very overrated experience because you expect a hot tub, sit there with a glass of champagne as you're sailing along, having a really good time, but actually there's just kids jumping in and out and using them as kind of a bit of entertainment. So hot tubs, again, a very mixed bag. People like the idea of them, but feel that actually the actual experience itself is very overrated. One of the things that a lot of people have said to me they think are overrated, although it's becoming a big trend in cruising, is the cruise line owned islands. So this is really particularly true in the Caribbean, where all of the cruise lines are starting to have their own private island. And on all of the cruises, they will stop in there at those islands, which they control, and they control the whole experience. Now, bear in mind, these islands are actually created, so they're normally just small islands. And what they've done is they've then created experiences on them. So some beach areas, they might have zip lines, they might have a bit of snorkeling, they might have some cycle stuff. They might have very luxurious cabanas where you can go and relax. But these are really created. You're not actually seeing the Caribbean, you're not seeing authentic islands. And what the cruise lines have done is really create a kind of a captive audience where they can sell you more stuff. And there's a real concern, this is an underwhelming experience. Now, there's some great things. So you've got, like Royal Caribbean have opened an amazing place where you've got big water slides, water parks, and really big attractions. So they are starting to make them much more packed full of features and benefits and all sorts of things going on. But the sense of actually, if you're cruising in a region, you're not getting to see an authentic island and the culture and the people and the history of a place. So a lot of people say they are also becoming very similar. So they're all kind of a much of a muchness, and the distinctiveness is going out of the ports you're calling. So you're going to Caribbean, but you're not really calling on authentic, genuine ports. So a lot of people feel that that whole experience of cruise line created islands and destinations is very, very overrated as an experience. Cruise transfers to and from airports at various ports are seen as being very overrated, partly because they're very expensive and can be quite a slow process. Particularly if you're in an airport, you could be hanging around for quite a long time before everyone's arrived from their flights to get on the bus. The same when you're leaving, you kind of hang around waiting for people, when actually you'll find often for less money, you can have a private transfer, whether it's Uber, some of these ride-hailing services, or even there may be some independent bus transfers. It can be cheaper, easier, and quicker to actually avoid the cruise line transfers because they can be quite long, slow, and can be very expensive. So they are seen as pretty overrated. Obviously, the security of knowing that you're connecting with the cruise line and the cruise line's managing it, but they can be seen as pretty expensive and pretty underwhelming. Definitely one of the areas that is seen as very overrated is the spa. Now, spas on cruise ships are taking over more and more space. So clearly a lot of people are using them, but they can be very expensive. So when I compare the cost of treatments to what I can get back in big cities like London or New York or wherever, they are pretty expensive. And then there's the big cross-sell. So you have a treatment and then the therapists are incentivized to really cross-sell you on buying lots and lots of products. So it's quite in some ways a stressful experience. I do find going to the spa kind of stressful, partly because it's stressful on the bank balance, but also at the end you're going to have to fight off the cross-selling, the upselling of products. So it's not as a relaxing experience as it could be. But definitely the spas, a lot of people feel that they're very overrated as an experience. Saying that, there clearly is a huge amount of people who love the spa because they're always busy and always packed out, which is why I guess they're getting bigger and bigger. Shopping is definitely seen as being something that's overrated. One of the challenges you have, particularly in places like the Caribbean and Alaska, the cruise ships have shopping advisors because they're incentivized to drive people into a lot of the chain stores. When you get off on a lot of those ports, it's basically generic. It's all the same stores, Diamond International, those kind of things. The cruise line is getting incentives for sending you there. I guess they're getting some kind of commission. And there's that big focus on shopping. You almost feel that you're going to some of these places and shopping is the most important thing to do. And the real sense of feeling that this is very overrated. Shopping is not why you're going to these places. Also because you're buying a lot of time, very generic products that you could buy anywhere else. Also on board, it's seen as very overrated. It can be relatively expensive. I think stuff on board is quite expensive, although cruise lines would disagree with that. And you've constantly got all these various promotions that, you know, they put the tables out selling off inches of gold chains and watches and bags and stuff. And the sense that actually shopping has become a big part of what happens around cruising, but it's really kind of overrated because it's not about authentic, genuine stuff that's really linked to the region and place that you're cruising in. Drinks packages are another area that is seen as being very overrated. Drinks packages, I think, are really expensive. I'm not a big drinker myself, but I look at the cost of drinks packages and these seem really costly, even bearing in mind that some of them you could count as some of your drinks, you know, specialty coffees or I guess some sodas. But they are pretty expensive. You do have to drink quite a lot to make them worthwhile. And the sense that actually they're very overrated because the cruise line's pushing you to buy drinks packages. And I always ask myself, if the cruise line and people are selling something so aggressively, it's presumably because they're making good margin and money out of them. So I always prefer personally not to have a drinks package unless I've bought it as part of an overall kind of cruise package and it's bundled in, and tend to just buy drinks more ad hoc because I found actually it's very overrated, the drinks packages, and I do spend much less money and I probably don't go quite as crazy, which I guess some people like drinks packages for. A thing that I think is overrated is buying art on a cruise ship. A lot of cruise lines have quite a lot of space for an art gallery and they do art auctions, and I guess it works and a lot of people buy art. When I talk to a lot of people who bought art, they feel that it's overrated, and actually they probably could have got it at sharper prices on land when they've got more time to think about it, consider it, compare prices. But art auctions, I think, are definitely overrated, and the whole art concept of buying on a cruise ship, I just personally don't really understand. A lot of people raise that as an issue. A lot of people go to the art auctions, by the way, because you often get a free glass of champagne, and so that's quite a big appeal for some people. But I do think they are an overrated part of cruising. Now, one of the things that I do like to do when I go on a cruise ship, I do like the casino. I like to play bingo and all those kind of things. However, a lot of people don't, and the casinos do take up quite a lot of space. There's often smoking in a lot of the casinos, and actually the odds, a lot of people would argue, on a cruise ship is not as good as, say, going to a place like Las Vegas or whatever. I like to do it. I never really won much money doing that, so I almost see it as a cost. But a lot of people think the whole focus on gambling casino is very overrated, and it's not really something that cruise lines should be focusing on as much, because there are other things they could use the space for. Now, it's very interesting because a couple of cruise lines, like Azamara, for example, have started to take the casino out to use it for more spaces for stuff around the shore excursions, the destinations, more places to drink and eat and that kind of stuff. So they decided actually getting rid of the casino is something that's going to add to the cruise experience overall. I guess on bigger ships, that's less of an issue and they want to give more diversity and choice. But a lot of people said the whole gambling thing is very overrated, and actually it's something that they end up spending money on, and there's things they probably could have spent more money on. But I guess that's something about self-control and getting stuck in yourself and doing that. I do like to have a bit of a flutter on a cruise and see it as part of the fun experience. But a lot of people say very, very overrated. There are lots of wonderful things about cruising. And as I've said, some of these things that people rate as overrated, other people think are a real plus. But those are the things, talking to people, they saw as the most overrated cruise experiences. If you find that helpful and interesting, why don't you watch another one of my many cruising tips and advice videos? Why don't you watch another one of those right now?